Welcome everybody. Welcome Christopher. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chris.
We were reminiscing earlier and we got the word breeze, didn't we?
Breeze.
Muriel Pemberton breezed into my life in the late 80s. We just put on a big show, very successfully, a sellout show of Pamela Kay. And she was also a Royal Watercolour Society artist, so I knew her work. I'd never met her. She breezed in. She looked around and said, I'd like a bit of this. You're going to be my art dealer. So you didn't, the sort of lady you didn't argue with. She was sweet, charming. She was like her artwork. She was vivacious, she was colourful, she was outgoing, she was full of life. And we had a terrific time for 2 years, particularly when I knew her work, but I didn't know the backstory. And of course, she invented fashion training. So as soon as I found that, I commissioned the very, very good author and art critic John Russell Taylor to write a book, and I did a beautiful limited edition, which is around a snip of £50. He did a wonderful job. They got on so well, and that was we were working up to a very big retrospective and the launch of the book. However, things were changing in Muriel's life. The day of the opening, I sent a car down to Hastings to pick her up. And as the car drove up, I stepped out into Ryder Street and opened the car door, and she stepped out and said, "Hello, I'm Muriel Pemberton." She knew she was having a great time, and she knew it was all about her that evening. She really had a great time, a great party, but she didn't quite know the significance of it. We know the significance now, and we're having a party a few years later. Liz, she told me it was her favourite niece. Liz is here. She flew over from Italy. Said that her birthday was what, on the 8th?
Yeah.
So we're celebrating Muriel's birthday. And who better to do this than somebody who also knew him at the Royal College? Now, it's difficult, because I've gone through this before. Those who know Professor Sir Christopher Frayling from the years that he's been popping in and out, he's been a great supporter and patron of the gallery over 40 years, will know the worth. And those who came to the Artisoni show, where we had a great opening, and he was wonderful at the opening, will also know that he is a very special man. I won't go into too much because you can look it up yourself. The Wikipedia runs to 40 pages. But I'll just take a couple of snippets. He was, you probably know, a very popular and long-working rector of the Royal College of Art from 2006 to 1996 to 2009. And he was very, very popular then. But I think, and he drove the Royal College on, and I think it really came to prominence during his tenure. But I think his greatest achievement, by far his greatest achievement, was to award me an honorary fellowship of the Royal It was downhill from then on. But he went on and spent 4 years as chairman of the Arts Council, and probably the last person to have a bit of fun at the Arts Council. It was, I think, 5 very good years, largely because the black hole that is Nardine Dorries wasn't the culture minister at the time. He was also, it is worth mentioning, the chairman of the Design Council, so who better? Christopher, thank you very much. Tell us about, make us misty-eyed about your account.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks, Chris. Gosh, I don't know what to do after that introduction. My wife and I, my wife's sitting down there, we spent the summer in the west of Ireland, and while I was there, I caught up with the novels and essays by Colm Tóibín, who I think is a very great writer, a great Irish writer. And in his autobiographical essay, A Guest at the Feast, he wrote this about his time at university. To us university students in the National Library, the art students were as exotic and colourful as jungle birds. They either had very long hair or very short hair. Some of the boys looked like girls, and vice versa. They were either very tall or very small. The readers in the National Library, on the other hand, were a dull-looking lot, wearing faded tweeds. The art students seemed to have made their own clothes or brought them second-hand. They were, to me, perfection in every way. I really wished that I was an art student. And I thought, you know, from a distance they looked like jungle birds. I thought that was the most wonderful image for this exhibition. Now, in my experience, people who haven't been to art school, who kind of worship it from afar, from across the street, as it were, from the National Library to what's going on opposite, tend to associate art schools either with fine art, with painting and sculpture, or, on the one hand, or with fashion, on the other, with style. They don't seem to be aware that anything goes on in between those two disciplines. So you're either a painter or you're a fashion designer. And fine art in art schools, its pedigree, its history is very well established. In its modern form, I think it goes back to Lorenzo de Medici gathering a few chums in his garden in Florence and talking about and practicing art in the 1480s. So we know where the modern art school began. It began with the Medicis. But the pedigree of fashion design in art schools, as distinct from dress or fabric or furnishing fabrics or textiles, which was the phrases that were used before Muriel came along, the pedigree of fashion design in art schools is much less well known. And I think it goes back to 1929, autumn 1929, when a 20-year-old scholarship girl from the Midlands, fresh out of Burslem Art School, completed her first year at the Royal College in South Kensington and had just returned for her second year. At the college, she was studying painting, and she had a scholarship to cover, quote, tuition, art materials, and living expense, those were the days, and living expenses, and her name was Muriel Pemberton. Her father, Thomas, had been an aspiring painter who decided that that wasn't necessarily the way to earn a living to bring up a family, so he set up a successful portrait photography studio instead. Her mother Alice was a soprano singer whose musical soirees were well known in the somewhat conservative industrial society that they mixed in. And Muriel was one of 5 children, 4 daughters, encouraged at home to paint, draw, knit, embroider, learn the piano and sing. And that's a very important part, I think, of her background, always affirming her skills from a very early age. Her teachers at the Royal College included, and a lot of them are exhibited in your gallery, Chris, Gilbert Spencer, Percy Horton, Barnett Friedman, Eric Revilius, Cyril Marney. They were her teachers. I used the word, and the young Henry Moore was teaching sculpture in the next door studio. He'd just graduated and had become a tutor. I say teachers, but I once asked one of the students from that era, a long time ago, about what sort of teaching actually went on in the painting studios. And he said the part-time tutors would come in and sort of have a good lunch and then stumble into the studios and walk around and sort of look at 1 or 2 things. And he said, I remember particularly 5 words that my tutor said to me. The only thing I can remember about my tutor is 5 words that he said to me while I was in the painting studio. And I said, well, were they really important words, words of wisdom? He said the 5 words were, have you got a light? So it was, teaching is a metaphorical concept, I think, in those terms. Anyway, Muriel Pemberton's fellow students at the time included Cecil Collins, John Piper, Kenneth Martin, Evelyn Dunbar, Elizabeth Vellacott, and Maurice Kesselman. Again, we've exhibited several of these, I think. And I'm sure she learned a lot more from her fellow students than she did from her tutors, which is often the case in art school. Muriel enjoyed her first year, especially the life classes, which took place within the V&A complex. But by her own account, like her father, she began to wonder how difficult it would be to make a living from drawing and painting alone. So at the beginning of the autumn term 1929, she went to see the head of the School of Design, Professor Ernest Tristram, as it then was, to ask if she could transfer her diploma to the study and practice of fashion. There was no provision for the subject at all. It was the most remarkable thing to ask when you think about it. There was no discipline of fashion, there was no sense of fashion design. There were no female teachers, of course, at the time. I think it took till the 1980s for a lot of female tutors to come into the Royal College. So it was a remarkable thing, but even more remarkable was what happened next, Tristram's reaction. Why was it remarkable? Well, firstly, Professor Tristram, known to the students as Trissy, to rhyme with Prissy, was a medievalist who specialised in the copying and restoring of cathedral wall paintings. Ideal to run design at the Royal College. According to one of his students, Professor Tristram detested the very thought of any connection with industry, and I quote, he was more interested in Walter Scott than in Le Corbusier or the Bauhaus. For him, design was about what he called a complete training in the arts. The way to become a designer was a complete training in the arts, which meant for him copying plaster casts for several months, followed by days in the life room. He was actually well enough known at the time to be satirised by Osbert Lancaster, so he has a certain sort of fame in that way. So that's one reason why his reaction was surprising. The second reason is that between art and design at the college at the time, the names of the two broad areas, you were either in the art school or the design school, there was a great gulf fixed. Helen Binion, have you exhibited? Yeah. Helen Binion, this is like a roll call of I tell you, this is the best commercial of the year. You know. Helen Binion, who recently graduated from the college, wrote, "The painting and sculpture students felt themselves to be pursuing aims so much more serious and elevated than those of the design students. So there was as little contact as possible between them at the college. If your work in the life room wasn't up to the professor's standards, you were kicked into the design school." Extraordinary, you know. Second 11 into the design school. Douglas Percy Bliss,
Yes.
okay, who also graduated in 1925, added, "I remember how we in the painting school put the situation. We used to say, designers do bad drawings and mount them beautifully, while we do good drawings and don't bother about the mounts at all." So that was the second reason why Tristram's reaction was remarkable, because there was a huge gulf between art and design. The third was that where equipment was concerned at the college, the facilities in the design school for embroidery and weaving and fabrics were rudimentary, to say the least. Nicholas Pevsner, the young Nicholas Pevsner, went on a fact-finding mission to art academies in the mid-20s, and he visited the Royal College, and he looked at the equipment for embroidery and weaving and said it was scanty and hardly suitable for instruction in industrial methods. And he contrasted this with the Bauhaus. He'd just been to the weaving studio at the Bauhaus, which was rather more lively, and concluded that the RCA was lamentably behind the times and stuck in a sort of pseudo-medieval world. So that's the third reason why Tristram's reaction was strange, because there were no facilities for fashion. Fourthly, the principal of the college, my predecessor as principal, was William Rothenstein. Have you exhibited William Rothenstein?
I have.
Thank you. I needn't ask, you know. A painter, especially of portraits, who is on record as saying that the Royal College of Art should at all costs avoid being A, a training school for art teachers, and B, an industrial or in any way vocational institution. And both of them were the subject of great pressures during the Depression. There was a lot of government reports saying, why doesn't the Royal College produce better teachers, and why doesn't the Royal College produce better designers for industry? He resisted strongly both. The Royal College of Art, he said, should be a refuge away from the marketplace. So that was another reason why Tristram's reaction was so strange. And there was a sense in Rothenstein's writings that trade was well below the educational salt. I can remember in 1996, the centenary of the college becoming the Royal College of Art, we put on a huge survey exhibition called Design of the Times, 100 Years of the Royal College of Art. And at the opening we had, where possible, graduates as ex-students for each decade of the college's history standing in the appropriate section of the show for the opening. And for the 1920s we had Enid Marks, or Marco, who'd left the college in 1925, representing her decade, the 1920s. She was 94 at the time, diminutive and very feisty. As Prince Charles, who opened the show, walked round, Prince Charles as he then was, he walked around the exhibits, and Enid suddenly stepped forward and snapped, "I suppose you realise I failed my final diploma in painting for being too advanced for them, and they tried to move me to the design school." Prince Charles didn't know what the hell she was talking about. She then handed him a lovely drawing of the Royal Yacht Britannia, and he said, "Thank you very much." Evidently, Enid had been waiting for 70 years to get this off her chest. It really was extraordinary, and very ironic, considering that she's best known for all those wonderful hard-wearing tweeds in the tube and London buses, which are still around. If ever there was a form of industrial design, that's it. But she clearly wasn't ashamed of working in design after she left. I then did something really silly. As we were walking away with Prince Charles, I said, I suppose you realise that Edith Marx is a cousin of Karl Marx, which she was. He didn't look awfully impressed at that, but then I did something even worse. I said, did you realise that Prince Albert and Karl Marx were near contemporaries at the same university in Germany? There's a fantasy. He was singularly impressed. They're rather silly of me, but you know, you say these things sometimes. All of which makes Professor Tristram's reaction to Muriel Pemberton's proposal all the more remarkable. Oh, by the way, we gave Edith Marx an honorary degree for painting shortly afterwards, so honours were even, and at last she got her honorary degree. Anyway, Tristram said yes. He agreed on condition that she draft her own curriculum, which, if approved, would allow her to contribute to continue her studies at the college within the School of Design. Here was someone who actually wanted to move from the painting studio to the School of Design, which I think rather surprised him. But if she wrote her own curriculum, it was fine. It was a new subject. Up to then, it had been seen as a hobby for young ladies, or an apprenticeship where people actually worked in couturier houses. That's how you learned fashion. You didn't learn within the academy. This was a very radical suggestion. So the determined and resourceful student then worked out her own timetable as well. She started with basic study in the life room, and as you can see from all these works, drawing and work in the life room was absolutely essential to her. That was the grammar. That was the basic grammar. Usage was what you then did with it, but she felt very strongly, and it's very, very sad that art schools today don't feel the same way, I feel. Anyway, first of all, in the life room, and then she did 1 day a week observing and sketching couture techniques at Revel and Rossiter's, who were dressmakers to Queen Mary. So she sat in on so she worked with practicing couturiers, not career academics, practitioners in the industry. That was new as well. And then 2 days a week for dressmaking classes at the Katinka School of Cutting down the road in Knightsbridge. And she did a deal. In order to pay for this, she arranged for the cutting students to learn drawing. She taught them drawing in exchange for them teaching her cutting. She was very resourceful about this. She managed to pay her way through the cutting course. And she spent as much time as she could in the V&A's National Art Library, where she researched the history of clothing, sketched, filled several notebooks, and talked, and this is important I think, to the in-house costume historian James Laver, who was later to become a lecturer at the Royal College. He became, I think, a big influence. As a result of all this, Muriel was able to write and illustrate a thesis to accompany her own collection of garments with which she graduated. And she graduated in 1931 with the first ever diploma in fashion at any art school in the UK, and indeed, some say, at any art school in the world. There's a photo of her proudly clutching her diploma in what's now the Madejski Garden at the V&A in Exhibition Road on graduation day in July 1931, looking very pleased, very exuberant, etc., for having done it. By 1936, a mere 5 years later, a government report called Advanced Education in London recommended that the RCA set up as soon as practicable a school of fashion and textiles with industrial links, since the subject was self-evidently both teachable and there were opportunities in the trade increasingly at a time of its significance to the economy. So Muriel Pemberton had invented the teaching of fashion in art schools, an achievement which would affect attitudes to fashion design all over the world. It wasn't just a matter of education, it's the matter of the way in which fashion design was viewed in all sorts of worlds. Design in an art environment and art in a design environment. Instead of learning by rote, originality, instead of teacher training, professionalism, and instead of career academics, practitioners in the industry. All of them were new. Muriel famously went on in 1932 to become a tutor in fashion drawing at St Martin's School of Art, Charing Cross Road, which eventually turned into a full-time post at the head of the first fully fledged fashion design course in Britain, still based on her original curriculum, with a very strong emphasis on fashion drawing, both in the life room and outside it. an emphasis on real drawing with the credo that students should have a mature understanding of the drawn image as well as of creative design. Again, amen to that. Large colour lino cut of the Lion and Unicorn, which was intended for the Brussels exposition, had been recycled and used for these occasions, the guards, trumpeters, the whole thing. And there she was standing there in dark glasses with an outfit to match her purple gown with a pink trim, still very stylish, very elegant at the age of 76. She really, really cut it. And the students worshipped at the shrine, they really did, I mean, because they realised this was the person who enabled all their courses to happen. And I remember showing her Eric Revilius's painting of Edward Borden in his studio, which belongs to the Royal College collection. And she remembered how Revilius, having been a student, came in as a teacher in 1930 and taught her in the design school. It was a lovely moment. What I didn't know then, and Chris has referred to this, what very few people knew then, was that she'd continued painting, often in watercolours or pastels with chalk, as you can see around you, exuberant, vital, confident images of flowers, landscape and people. The sort of images you don't walk past because they really do grab your attention. She continued with that throughout her professional career, and she continued with it in a big way after her retirement. A painter's approach to design and a designerly approach to painting. Two aspects of the same aesthetic for her, I think. Not with tongue-in-cheek, to coin a phrase, but for real. Tongue-in-cheek? I thought that was quite good. I'd known about her fashion illustrations when I wrote her oration for the News Chronicle at Vogue and her costume designs for theatre, but I didn't know about her private drawings and paintings. And after her retirement, of course, she'd concentrated on this aspect of her creativity, her first and last love, again, building bridges between art and design. And it was only in 1993, a few months before her death, when Chris Beetles first mounted a major survey exhibition of her paintings and arranged for the publication of her biography, Art and Fashion, that the art world and the critics at last woke up to this aspect of her talent. They knew all about the other aspects of her talent, but not this, and it's the subject of this exhibition as well. So I'm really delighted to be opening Muriel Pemberton, painter of beautiful people in beautiful clothes, over 120 images in all, as a tribute to a very special and influential artist, designer and educator, a pioneer who really believed in art education. And I don't know if you know this, but I'm the slightly nerdish person who does this. Muriel Pemberton's name is an anagram of remember, meteor, métier and premiere, which seems to be just the right combination. Thank you very much.
Prince Charles was very relieved to be king, so he didn't get teased by you anyway. Now, I said beforehand that I wouldn't mention this to anybody again, because it's usually the way in which you're introduced. But Christopher, I lied. Christopher is, to you nowadays, on Radio 4 and many films, is the leading cultural historian probably in the world, the go-to guru for this area, and is the world-famous expert on spaghetti westerns.
I said you wouldn't mention that.
I said I wouldn't mention that. And Dracula. I say it to inform that when you were made a knight in 2000 for services to cultural history and design,
and art education.
And art education. You said you wouldn't mention that. He took as his motto, forgive my schoolboy Latin, Perge Scelsus, mihi diem perficias. Translated, it is proceed, Violet, and let the day be rendered perfect for my benefit. And as Dirty Harry would say, go ahead, make my day. Christopher's made our day. Thank you very much. The bar is still open.